Hello. Oh. Good evening and welcome. Wow, my voice sounds amazing in this microphone in this room. So, as you know, we're getting ready for a long-awaited global gathering of the United Methodist Church. It officially kicks off this Tuesday and runs for 2 weeks. And so we wanted to hold a two-part sessions, a pre and a post, so we can all get on the same page a bit about what to expect, as well as a lovely refresher of who we are as Methodists and the system that we are part of that enables this system to work the way it does. And then in May 19th, we'll do kind of a debrief of what happened at General Conference and what that might mean, if anything, for us at St. Luke's and in the Mountain Sky Conference. And as per usual, I'm going to pass it off to the actual experts. So tonight, Monty's going to start, and he's going to lead us through the history, which is what he excels at, and will help us find our context of where we are today at St. Luke's. And then Susan is going to take over and talk about some of the key events that have happened in the last few years that have brought us to where we are today. And I think Stephanie and Susan will be great to be able to share about what we expect might happen at General Conference. So thank you for being here. Thank you for bringing some treats. We will sort of let the speakers go and then have some time for questions at the end. But I think I will do that. Let's pray. Gracious God, God of blue skies and snowy mountains, we're so grateful for the sunshine that came out today to remind us of your beautiful creation. We just ask that your spirit would be with us in this space as we are so faithfully optimistic about what is to come for our church that we love. So thank you for the opportunity to gather, and thank you for those who have worked very hard to move our church forward with a bright future possible in front of us. Amen.
I think I recognized every face as it came in the door, so I won't do a whole lot of introduction here. But I am a lay leader, and I have been involved in Methodist history, and my family has been involved in the Methodist movement for a long, long time. So anyway, what I want to cover today is, up further, yes, okay, thank you. I'm not a professional, so you have to give me some slack here. What I wanted to start off with here is you're going to hear a lot of things about what Methodists are, what Methodists believe, what we're going to do. Well, some of it will be well informed. A lot of it won't be very well informed. So I want to spend a little time here talking about who we are from the beginning and what that means to us personally, but also as a church, as St. Luke's United Methodist Church, because we are firmly rooted in the Wesleyan tradition, and that shapes who we are. So we're going to talk some about that. We're also going to talk about a few things that are going to come up here, I think, as we talk through this, how we work as a belief system, as a Methodist belief system, and what the General Conference is going to mean about that. So we'll start there. What divides us? I think the first thing I need to do is tell you where I stand, because I'm going to be talking about something that's fairly controversial. And so you need to know what my biases are and whether they match your biases or are opposed to your biases. We are dealing with an aspect of human sexuality, a very complex issue. I'm a scientist, and what age has taught me is there's much in the world that I don't fully understand. And that list gets longer every day. In the face of this uncertainty, my United Methodist beliefs lead me to believe that if I am uncertain, I should err on the side of love. I'm not judging who's right or wrong right now. I'm called to love, and that's how I'm going to work my way through this situation. Well, I'm trying to figure out what's. Huh? Yeah. St. Luke's is a postmodern United Methodist Church. That simply means that time-wise, we are what follows the modern Methodist Church. The modern Methodist Church started to form around the beginning of the 20th century. It was a very vital organization through the 1970s, 80s, and it started to fade as a church. That's happened before in the Methodist movement, and we go, okay, what's next? Well, it's the postmodern Methodist Church. Right now, that doesn't have any theology associated with it. We're not there yet. It's simply a time statement. We are post the modern Methodist Church. At St. Luke's, we look back at our 300 years of history and ask, when were we a loving and productive church? When were we not? We try and let those answers guide us into the future and shape our postmodern Methodist theology. It's not, well, we're going to start over and make it up again. It's, where have we done the right thing? Where haven't we? And let that guide us. What do Methodists believe? Well, Methodists do not have a confessing or creedal statement that defines us. Rather, within a broad range of Christian thought, we are free to use Scripture, tradition, experience, and reason to determine our personal beliefs. This is an important thing as we come up on this General Conference. All the General Conference can act on is the Book of Discipline. And while sometimes people try and use it as a confessional statement or a creedal statement, it is not. It is a book of guiding organization of the Methodist Church. Okay? If I disagree with the results of this General Conference, I can say, I don't agree, and nobody's going to throw me out of the Methodist Church. If we as St. Luke's say, we don't agree, they're not going to throw us out of the Methodist Church either. That's a key point. This is simply related to the Book of Discipline and the organization of the church. And you are free to agree or disagree with that, given your interpretation of Scripture, tradition, reason, and experience. As opposed to that, right now I have a cousin who just retired as an associate pastor at Saddleback, which is Rick Warren's church in California. Southern Baptist Conference told them, you might be disaffiliated because you're doing something stupid, which is put a woman in charge of a teaching position. Well, we'd have a pretty empty pulpit if that's the way it worked around here. Instead, we're called to an action, the pursuit of Christian perfection, which is to live our lives for the love of God and the love of our neighbors. And there are 3 simple rules for that, aren't there? And one of them is do no harm, okay? And so we need to keep that in mind as we go through. Do all the good we can and stay in love with God. Most Methodists are many in their theology and believe that God loves all people. God's grace is a gift given to all people, and that people have the freedom to accept or reject that grace and choose how to live their lives. Whatever our differences, we're called to live together in loving, productive Christian communities. We're going to touch on these points here as we go along here and kind of outline some of it here. Um, 1738 or 1739, 3 young Church of England clergymen are walking up a muddy path. One is George Whitefield, the other 2 are the Wesley brothers, John and Charles Wesley. They're going to preach in the open air. They're not doing it because it's a great day or they're working on their suntans. They're doing it, they're out in the open air because they have been forbidden for preaching their message of God's love to all people in the churches. Why? Because the people in the pulpits really don't want to hear that. As they walk up the path, they come to a brickyard, and they get set up to preach, and their audience is the working class that's just forming as England industrializes. Why are they listening to somebody preaching in the open air? Because they're not really welcome in the churches. They are looked down upon by the people sitting in the pews. So we have the unwanted preaching to the unwelcome. And that's how we started as a movement. And that method, did we go backwards here? Did I go backwards? Forward. Free grace sermon. It might work better. I'm going to put this down right now, and we'll go from there. And this is the sermon probably that John Wesley preached at that time and several other times in the Midlands of England in 1738 and 39. And the point of it is the grace or the love of God from which cometh our salvation is free in all and free for all. There are no qualifications. It does not depend on any power or merit in a man, no, not to any degree, nor in whole nor in part. It does not otherwise depend either on the good works or righteousness of the receiver. It is not anything he has done or anything that he is. It is free for all as well as in all. This is the message that was preached at the start of the Methodist movement. God's grace is available to all people. God's grace guides each of us. That's a key point. That's why when you walk in the door here, the word on top is grace. That's a key part of who we are. Something else that's very important to us is community. This is Count Zinzendorf, and he said there can be no Christianity without community. Count Zinzendorf said one of the highest expressions of the Christian faith is to live together in a loving, productive Christian community. A community where we are kind and respectful to each other and kind and respectful to those who don't agree with us and are outside there, and who work hard to make the world a better place. That is what productive means, that we reach out into the world and say, what can we do to make this a better place? Right now in our sanctuary is the Performing Arts Academy. That is a service that we've provided to the community, a program we've provided to the community that nobody else had at the time. That's the type of thing we're looking at there. And so eventually, next slide, the Count formed a community in Germany called Herrnhut. And out of that came the Moravian missionaries that John and Charles Wesley met on the boat going to America. After that, when Charles came back to London, he hooked up with the Moravians. And then when John came back, he hooked up with the Moravians, and then he went to Herrnhut and spent a lot of time with the Count. So community is very important to who we are as St. Luke's. And we use it productively and lovingly to make the world a better place and to help all of us. And finally, you invite everybody in. You ask them to be a community. How do you get along? Well, that's kind of a problem for some people. The Moravians, of course, say in the essentials unity, in the non-essentials liberty, in everything love. And that was a guide that we looked at. John Wesley and George Whitefield, who was a dear friend, never agreed on the point of predetermination. And finally decided that the best thing was just to put it aside. And out of that, I think, came this sermon from John Wesley. But it wasn't entirely that point. It was also that Europe had been in conflict for 30 years, the 30 Years' War during the middle 17th century. And in the name of Jesus, we'd killed a third of the population of Europe. And in the name of Jesus, we killed 20% of the population of the British Isles. And people said, what have we done? And so they started looking around and decided that maybe it wasn't about politics and power, it was about love and taking care of each other. So several of the groups that influenced Wesley were ahead of their time in believing Christian love was more important than doctrine, and were accepting of a difference in belief. Let's not fight over what we believe. Let's accept that we're not all going to agree on it and love each other anyway. The German pietists, who were Lutheran, instead of merely didactic and often bitter attacks on the people who don't agree with this, a sympathetic and kindly treatment of them. So this was the influence on Wesley as he spent time with the Moravians and other people who had this kind of viewpoint. Let's go to the next one here. And so he preached this sermon about, I think this was about 1750s. Is your heart right as my heart is with your heart? If it be, give me your hand. I do not mean be of my opinion. You need not. I do not expect or desire it, nor do I mean I will be of your opinion. I cannot. It does not depend on my choice. I can no more think than I can see or hear as I will. Keep you your opinion and I mine, and that as steadily as ever. You need not even endeavor to come over to me, nor bring me over to you. I do not desire you to dispute these points or to hear you speak one word concerning them. In other words, George, be quiet. Let all opinions alone on one side or the other. Only give me your hand. Getting along, loving each other, being kind to each other is more important than winning our arguments. We need to keep that in mind as we go through this. We won't all agree. That doesn't mean we can't live together. It doesn't mean we can't be a productive community together. But this isn't the first time we faced a situation like this. In 1844, we had a general conference. And the issue that came up was slavery. And there was a southern bishop who had married a woman whose family had slaves. And the northern part of the church said, you need to release them or no longer be a bishop. And the southern church said, no, that's not right. So they voted, and after the debate, the General Conference voted to suspend the Bishop Andrew from the exercise of his office so long as he could not or would not free his slaves. A few days later, the dissidents, i.e. the Southern Church, came up with a plan of separation which permitted the annual conferences in slaveholding states to separate from the Methodist Episcopal Church in order to organize their own ecclesiastical structure. The plan of separation was adopted, the groundwork was prepared for the creation of the Methodist Episcopal Church South. We've done it before, 1844. The difference between us and anybody else is 1939. In 1939, the Methodist Episcopal Church and the Methodist Episcopal Church South and the Methodist Protestant Church, which is separated on the issue of slavery, merged to form the Methodist Church. We are the only major denomination that split on the issue of slavery and then rejoined together. Under it all is that commitment to be a community together. Wasn't perfect, okay? Despite women being a part of the clergy in different Methodist groups since the Wesleyan days in England, the ordination was prohibited at the merger. This continued till 1956. And officially, unofficially, it kind of continued into the 60s. The Southern Church was still segregated until 1968, and the holiness movement remained very strong in the Southern Church. So we had to accept a few things that weren't right for a while before we were able to come to where we fully needed to be. And we're still not there. We're still not there, but we're working on it. This always reminds me, women being part of clergy in different Methodist groups. We had a woman who was with us for 10 years, Patricia Westlake. Patricia was a dear person. And eventually we lost her to a pulmonary issue. But she was a woman who had been ordained in the Methodist Church as an elder and not given an appointment as we were going through this transition to getting women back into the clergy. And so several of these women kind of disappeared. And eventually Patricia did get a appointment at an ordination. But the thing I also liked about Patricia was there's a Methodist tradition, if you disagree but you don't want to be disruptive to the process, called standing witness. If you don't agree, doesn't mean you have to yell at somebody. You stand witness. And Patricia used to put on her robes and go down to the immigration court and stand in the back of the immigration court just to remind the people she didn't agree with what was going on. She wasn't going to disrupt it, but you knew that she was there. Sometimes we have to stand witness. And there'll be times as we go through this general conference that will probably be the case. And with that, I'll turn it over to Susan. And for any questions, thoughts?
Questions first?
Yeah, thanks. The Southern Church was still segregated until 1968, till the merger again.
Mm-hmm. There was a CME, a Colored Methodist Episcopal Church, that was set up for that purpose. And then in 68, they said, the rest of the world says we can't be segregated, we can't either.
From the time I joined the church, which was my first church at the age of 3 or whatever, that reflects my feelings and thoughts of what was going on the best I've ever heard.
Well, thank you.
Why did you, the Catholic spirit?
Catholic is universal, not Roman Catholic, but universal. Yes, it's universal spirit. That we all get along, universal, small c, not big C.
I'm sorry, what?
Small c, not big c.
Right, small c. I saw that, but I guess I've never, universal. Okay, thank you.
Universal is what it means. Okay.
So I'll introduce myself because there are some of you who I have seen, but maybe not as familiar with. I'm Susan McIntosh. Like Monty, I've been a lifelong Methodist, well, except for like the first 2 years where I lived in Canada, and I was a United Church of Canada, which has a Methodist part in it. So, there's that. I have been a lifelong Rocky Mountain Conference / Mountain Sky Conference Methodist as well. Grew up in Utah, where we considered ourselves a pretty strong denomination despite the majority otherwise. So, in 1968, we talked about the segregation finally being eliminated. And if you go to the next slide, I wanted to talk about some of those things. But first, the main point that created all sorts of frustration, separation, division, anxiety, angst, hatred, if I will, happened in 1972. In 1968, the Methodist Church merged with the Evangelical United Brethren Church. In 72, the next quadrennium, so we do general conferences every 4 years, most of the time, they added this line: the United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers this practice incompatible with Christian teaching. There is no other behavior, to my knowledge, that is listed in the Book of Discipline like this. This was the beginning of what we have seen happen now. Next slide, please. So in 1968, as I said, we had the merger. Great. 1972, we got this little tiny piece of language stuck in the Book of Discipline. Again, it's not creedal, it's the Book of Discipline, right? The new social principles were created as well. There are pieces and parts in there that pay attention to how people relate to each other and recommended behaviors. There's stuff on gambling in there. There's stuff on how you treat your kids. There's stuff on expected, how do you treat your staff when you work as a boss, right? Every quadrennium since, there's been arguments between what I'll call the traditionals and the progressives. I call them that because in 2019, those were the titles that were given to the groups that ended up having that caused the big separation in 2019. In 2016, we had a call for a special conference. There was so much division that the bishop said, hey, wait a minute, you know what? We can't do this. So they're going to do what every good Methodist does and form a committee. And they probably had many potlucks. This was a special committee called the Committee on the Way Forward. It was made up of delegates to General Conference, bishops from across the world, because at this point, the United Methodist Church is a global church, right? So we have a lot of representatives from the Philippines, from African countries, from Eastern Europe. So we need to stop thinking about life as US citizens and think about life as global citizens, and recognizing that we have to, well, not we have to, we can love everybody still, right? So in 2016, not only was this special conference called and the Commission on the Way Forward, Bishop Karen Oliveto was elected at Western Jurisdiction a couple months later. Bishop Karen Oliveto was the first gay or lesbian bishop to be elected to our church. Openly, yes, thank you. Yes, I need to be clear on that. The first openly gay or lesbian bishop to be elected. She tells great stories about a bishop who was not openly gay, but was obviously gay. And served well. Because, that doesn't matter. We have come to recognize that sexual orientation can be, and here I'll express my opinion, sexual orientation is a continuum. Does it affect the way you do your work? No. Not any more than the fact that I'm left-handed affects the way I do my work, which, by the way, used to be considered a sin. So, but correctable. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so 2019, we had the special called conference. There were 3 plans put in front of the delegates, and this doesn't show very well. The traditional plan, the one plan, and the community plan or something, which was basically saying, well, we'll still be one general church, but we'll have 3 types of congregations. The conservative congregation, the moderate congregation, and the liberal congregation, and that's going to help bishops decide how to appoint people, pastors, and the more liberal congregations will allow same-sex marriages and the more traditional ones won't. That was really confusing. The traditional plan was, we'll keep things the way we are, thank you very much, which was fine for the more conservative folks who didn't think that gays and lesbians should be preachers, who didn't think that there should be gay or lesbian marriage allowed. And that plan was kind of thrown into the mix near the end of the committee's work on the Commission on the Way Forward. Nobody thought anything of it. But it's the one that passed by, kind of a slim majority, but kind of not. So in 2019, this passed. It was devastating to a lot of the folks in the Western jurisdiction in particular, because we tend to be, the radicals, if you will. Free thinkers, there you go, that's a better term. But it was 2019, we knew there was a conference coming up in 2020, and we said, okay, we'll deal with it in 2020, right? Well, yeah, we know what happened then, right? COVID. So, 2019, I was elected to be the reserve jurisdictional delegate. So I would be able to go to General Conference. I would go to Jurisdictional Conference, which is where we elect bishops, but that's only for the jurisdiction, the western half of the US. And that was great. I thought, okay, I'll be really heavy and involved in the United Methodist Church for a couple of years. Yeah. 4 years later, I am wearing the shirt that says, you can't read it very well, unfortunately, the 2020 General Conference, the one being held in 2021, 2022, 2024. It's gonna happen in 2 days. There are people who are already there, so Lord willing. And then at the bottom it says, it's history in the making no matter what you call it. Because it is. This is going to be historic. So let me back up. In 2019, as well as in addition to the traditionalist plan passing, there were a few little pieces of legislation that said, well, if you don't like the way our church is going, this is how you can leave the church. There were rules on how churches would have to vote and have a 2/3 majority within their congregation to decide to leave. If they decided to leave, they would need to pay their conference back for the property, because in the United Methodist Church, it's the conference that actually owns the property and the building. Okay, when the conference, the special conference in 2019 ended, all of the traditionalists, all of the folks on the conservative side were thinking, great, this is going to mean that all of the liberals, all of the Western jurisdiction free thinkers are going to leave our church and leave us alone. But then nothing happened. And we sat and we waited. And the traditionalists got impatient. They started a group called the Global Methodist Church. This was in, when did I say? 2022. So you know what happened? Because they'd been rumbling about this, we started seeing disaffiliations. That's the official Methodist term for when a church left. We started seeing those starting in 2019, and it got larger and larger until 2023, which was really the last year that this was available. And the majority of those churches are the ones who tend to be more conservative, tend to be the ones who are saying, no, you can't, you have to follow these rules, you have to follow it this way, right? So they have continued, and at this point, 25% of the churches in the US have left the congregation. Not all of them are part of the Global Methodist Church. Some of them have connected with other congregations, other communities. Some of them are going to be freestanding. There's a term for that. What? Oh, that's right, there's also the Collegiate Methodist Church, which is another group. So, okay, next slide. So part of the reason why I wanted to show this is because there was a lot of research done out of the theological orientation of the United Methodist Church. This is something that Monty kind of touched on, right? We have a broad array of beliefs. And at one point, we had a Sunday school class where we talked about being a purple church, where you aren't necessarily one way or the other, or there's acceptance in standing and in both beliefs, in multiple beliefs in the church, and still being in community, right? This was a survey that was done in 2019, and you'll see, oh, it didn't show up very well, but 44% of the United Methodist Church viewed themselves as conservative Christian, conservative traditional Christian. So probably saying, yes, we do want a statement of faith. We do want to dictate who preaches. We do want to say, no, our pastors aren't going to have aren't going to supervise or oversee a gay or lesbian marriage. We have 28% who were moderate centrists saying, well, what's all the fuss about? I just want to go to church. I just want to go to my potlucks, right? 20% were considered the progressive liberals, the ones who really, they wanted the LGBTQ community to feel at home, to feel a part of the community. And then there's about 8% that they really weren't sure. And on the right side, I have a sample question, which is, what should the primary focus be of the United Methodist Church? 88% of the conservatives said the primary focus should be saving souls for Jesus. And 68% of the progressives said it should be advocating for social justice. We're looking at essentially two different continuums here, right? There was an interesting article in The Atlantic. It was actually in 2019, 2020-ish. And it talked about how in religion, you're looking at relationships of three types. There's the relationship of the person to God, the relationship of the person to other people, and the relationship of the person with themselves. There's a tendency, and I'm emphasizing tendency, for conservative religious folks to focus more on that relationship between themselves and God, which means they might tend to follow rules or want more rules put in place so that they can say, this is right, this is the way I want. Then there's a tendency, again, for folks on a more liberal slant to want that relationship with people. Is one right or wrong? No, it's different. But when there's one group of people who are saying, you can't be part of my church, it's really hard to stay a church. So that's where we are now. We have this disaffiliation. Our church is 25% smaller now than it was in 2019 because of the disaffiliations. There's also, I think if you could go to the next slide, there's also a tendency for all attendance across most mainline Protestant churches to drop. And I jumped ahead of myself. So this is a chart that shows the 2019 churches in the light blue with the border on it. So those are the number of churches. The orange slashes are the churches that disaffiliated, and the green churches are the ones that are remaining. The group way over on the right is the Western jurisdiction. That's us. That's the Mountain Sky Conference, Pacific Northwest, Cal Nevada, California, not Arizona, yes, Desert Southwest, and Cal Nevada and CalPAC, California Pacific. And I think Alaska too. Yeah, Desert Southwest. The other 5 or 4 jurisdictions tend to be bigger, as you can see by Many of them, all of them, the number of churches that disaffiliated, well, except for the Northeastern, the number of churches that disaffiliated is about the same as the number of churches that we have in the whole Western jurisdiction. We had some disaffiliations too, and they were hard and they were sad. I remember sitting in annual conference last year, practically in tears, because there were 40 churches that left. It was hard. It was really hard. But we still have churches. We still have communities. And we have a hope that we will continue stronger because we are able to focus a little bit better on the things that really matter to us instead of this infighting. If you've been paying attention to the news for the last, 20 years, most of the time when the United Methodist Church is mentioned, it's about the lesbian and gay issue, nothing else. What about UMCOR? What about all of the work that our United Methodist Committee on Relief does? What about all of the work that the church, the Faith and Justice group does on social issues? There's all sorts of other things that our church could be known for, but this has been kind of overshadowing everything. Can you go to the next slide? In 2021, this was after the special called conference in 2019, this was during the disaffiliations, the bishops got together, as they do on a regular basis, and they made this statement: we cannot be a church shaped by our political positions. We cannot be a traditional church or a progressive church or a centrist church. We cannot be a gay or straight church. Rather, Christ calls us to make space for one another, appreciate one another, and look for Christ in each other. Sounds a little bit like Wesley. Give me your hand, right? Yeah. So this is kind of where we are now, where we're standing now. Can you go to the next slide? Because of this, we've got a lot of things going on. There's been a large movement called BUMC, which talks about some of the things that we want to focus on, like living the gospel, disciple making, belonging, and inclusion. This is just a sample of some of that information. I'm not going to read all of it because I do want to keep moving. And then one more set of these. Influence, connection, and impact, and the focus on experiencing God. Now, if you know, there was one piece that was talking about inclusion. Well, yeah, we want to make sure that everybody's included, just like the Wesleys did when they sought out the unwelcome by going to the factories, by going out to the fields to preach. Well, we want to do the same thing. We want to be a global community and welcome everybody. Okay, next slide. All right, so what do we expect in Charlotte? Next, first off, we want to be in community. It's been 8 long years since we've had this general conference, and there are people who have had friendships across the globe that they've been missing deeply. And we've been missing it as a whole community. So that's going to be our first and primary goal. We talk about Christian conferencing, where we pass legislation, but we are in community too. Next slide. And yes, we will pass legislation. We will do the business of the church. The 3 main focuses are the ones that I have up here. There's regionalization, so that we can make sure that the mission of the church is not US-centric and actually works for all of the United Methodists around the globe. We want to revise the social principles because, principles that have been written over 32 years, 42 years, 50 years, I can't do math, and then rewritten every 4 years by committee, they don't sound so good anymore. So we're fixing those. And then removing harmful language, those lines about incompatibility with the United Methodist Church. We want to take those out. Next slide. I'm going to go into this a little bit deeper because this is kind of the meat and potatoes of why we're going through conference. So regionalization is basically removing or reducing US centrism. There have been general conferences where the entire global representation of the United Methodist Church sits there and listens to US folks debating salary ranges or retirement plans for US-based clergy. That doesn't seem the right way to handle that kind of work. So regionalization would basically adjust the balance. Right now, in the US, there's what's called jurisdictions. I talked about the Western jurisdiction. There's 4 others here in the US. And then there's central conferences outside of the US. We would basically make a level playing field. And the US would be a central conference, and all of the other conferences would be a central conference. I don't know all of the specifics on that, but it would basically set everything to be more level. There would also be some ability to be more autonomous within your region, right? So certifying colleges for clergy, local pastor rules and regulations would be more focused in the community based on their needs. And then because of that, we'd have to make changes to the Book of Discipline, to different criteria for ordained ministry, and also things like the hymnal and ritual. Maybe there's hymns and rituals that make sense in the US that don't make sense in Nigeria or in the Philippines. So let's make sure that they have the capability to do that. Some of the regions have already done this, but this would basically make that easier for everybody to do. And then of course, there'd have to be some judicial administration that would have to be adjusted for this. Again, I am happy to talk more about it, and if you have more questions, I'll do my better research on it. But there's about 20 pieces of legislation around this, which can be pretty complex. Yeah.
This sounds all well and good, but I'm wondering if you have any feel for how universal this is. How likely is it that people from the Philippines and Nigeria are going to go for it?
Good question. How universal is this? Much of the legislation that was written for regionalization was actually written outside of the US. They've been asking for this for a long time, and the US needs to stop being the big brother and thinking that we can protect everybody and just be a partner. Yeah.
I think recently there are now more United Methodists outside of the United States than there are inside the United States.
Monty, you're definitely true, right. There are more people outside the US, more United Methodists outside the US than there are in the US now. Gordon?
Do you in any way foresee this regionalization being applied to the debate about inclusion? And the reason I ask that, at a meeting here a couple of months ago, our guest speaker spoke that he said, I hear there are ideas floating about to maybe let the U.S. have its statement about inclusion versus other areas of the world.
Yes. Is this going to affect inclusion? Yes, it will. In a lot of other countries, there are several other countries where being gay or lesbian is a crime, whereas here in the US, it's legal to marry as a gay or lesbian couple. So yes, the inclusion might have an impact on this. And we're trying to figure that out in the most loving, community-focused way possible. Again, it's difficult, right? Because we're also dealing with some communities, some environments where there's polygamy. Do we accept polygamy in this country and lesbian and gay marriage in this country? We have to figure that out. That's going to be a struggle, right?
Just a comment, that's been an issue in Africa.
An issue in Africa in situations where somebody decides they are Christian, joins the church, and has 4 wives. Do you throw 3 women and all their children out in the street? Or do you recognize the situation and say the Christian thing to do here is to make sure that all are taken care of?
Good point. Yes.
Is there pushback from the U.S. about, since you mentioned that this regionalization is brought to the table outside of the U.S., is there opposition to it in the U.S.?
Is there opposition in the U.S.? I'm not sure. One of the things that's tricky about this conference is because we've had 25% of our churches leave. It's really hard for the current delegates to kind of get a feel for who's supporting and who's not supporting different pieces of legislation. In the past, it was really easy. You know, we had the Good News Group, and we knew what they supported. Many of those folks have left because they are now part of the Global Methodist Church. But there's a handful of folks who are still in the United Methodist Church, but are still conservative. So it's hard to know. Other questions? Yes, we will find out. Gordon.
One relating to data, you said that 40 churches have disaffiliated. Was that Mountain Sky Conference or Colorado?
Mountain Sky Conferences.
Predominantly rural.
Yes, many of them were rural. Some of them did not leave because of the LGBTQ issue. Some of them left because they felt like they were ignored, because they are small, rural churches. In the Mountain Sky Conference, the conflict is not traditional or liberal so much as rural and urban. Yeah, or big and small churches. Sharon.
So what is the structure for the debate that will happen over the week? I mean, I know there's small groups.
What is the structure for the debate? Yes. Yes. So the first week we will meet in committees. There are 30 different committees that will have divvied up all of the legislation, and we'll figure out, you know, can we combine these 2 bills, or does this one really need to be there, right? So the first week will be in those committees, determining that.
So there's over 1,000 pieces
Yes.
of legislation, and we cannot simply ignore legislation that was provided before 2020. So there are several pieces of legislation for people who are no longer members of the church, who have disaffiliated, and so we have to, we have to go through the process to eliminate legislation appropriately. So because of the large number of legislation, it's broken into group and then, you know, further decided how can we combine, or what can we vote on within committee, and what do we have to take to the floor.
And some of that depends on who gets to be voted as the chair of the committee on Tuesday. Well, probably on Wednesday, because Tuesday is orientation. So, and yeah, we follow Robert's Rules of Order. So we have the committee the first week, and then we'll sit in session as the full body the second week and vote and debate and listen to pros and cons and amendments to amendments, and things happen really quickly, apparently, so. Yes, you can all follow along.
Can you talk a little bit about the language and the interpretation and how that works? So
So-
everything is happening. There's not a pause for interpretation, but people are.
Oh, right, yes. English speaking. So because we're global, all of this legislation has been translated into 4 different languages. And there will be real-time interpretation during all of these sessions. It will slow it down a little bit from what I understand, but yeah, that's also an issue. So when a person comes to a microphone to speak, if English is not their native language, the other representatives will put on their headset and listen to it in English from the interpreters. Like the UN. It's really amazing. I believe there will be Zoom presentation. Yes, you have to be present to vote. That is another issue. You have to be present to vote. In the past, delegates have gotten their official invitation to the conference about a year ahead of time. There are some countries where you have to take a year to apply for a visa to travel to the US. Some of our delegates did not get their official invitation until 2 weeks ago. So we're very concerned that we won't have a sufficient voice from some of our delegate countries. Well, I don't know if you did this on purpose, but there have been letters complaining about how the General Conference Board has behaved with this. I don't know if they could have done it any faster, but I don't know. So, yeah. Where what? What are the other languages? French, Spanish, no, not Spanish. Swahili. Kiswahili. French.
French, Portuguese, and Kiswahili.
Yeah.
And see, Portuguese is a big language in southern African countries.
Portuguese is a big language in Southern Africa, yeah. And like I said, there's a whole German delegation. There's a large portion of folks from Eastern Europe. I'm assuming that French is going to be the language that they will be using.
And those are the 4 languages of printed material. There is active interpretation of additional languages.
Right. And we have things like Google that make it easier to translate, so that's helpful.
How's disaffiliation going outside the U.S.?
Oh, good question. How's disaffiliation going outside the U.S.? Officially, in 2019, the legislation that allowed for disaffiliation in the U.S. was only for the U.S. One of the other things that we will be addressing is whether we want to do disaffiliation outside of the U.S., which I think would be fair, and how to do that. So that's going to be an intriguing question. That doesn't sit within our 3 Rs. There's all sorts of other pieces, and that's one of them. So, yeah. Let me keep going on some of these other questions. So go to the next slide. The revised social principles. I'm just going to say this was written in 2019, and it's beautiful. If you ever get a chance, just Google Revised Social Principles United Methodist, and you'll find it. It was written over several years with hundreds of people and thousands of readers responding to it across the globe through listening sessions. Very well done. Very well done. And the goal is to accept it as it is, recognizing that it's not perfect, but we can make changes as we go. So, and then, yeah.
We're still talking, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I just had a thought, this doesn't happen very often. Anyway, what I was searching for is, well, first of all, I've always been different all my life, and it may be because my baptism was in a collegiate Methodist church, and I have no idea what kind of Methodist church that is. But so what?
Yeah,
Anyway.
Was that your
I don't
question?
need to know, I don't care. Oh, no, that's just, I'm getting off track. I'm trying to get on track, back on track. But I think whatever happens, the person will find their faith and belief and love where they need to be.
Whatever,
Irrespective of all the organization, everything else that goes on. And then we sit back and we count the numbers and think something's great, something's failing, something's not working, we gotta change this, something's gonna be better. And it just boils down to how many people are going to be comforted in faith and love wherever they are at. And the way I fit that in, there was a guy, I have worked my 36 years in bureaucracy. Not as complicated as this, but they tried to make it.
They tried.
And within that, I don't know how I survived, except I had some really good friends that got me out of trouble lots of times. But within that, there was one guy that ended up being my mentor just by coincidence. It wasn't by me, for God's sakes. Anyway, and we would get in these big debates. We do this, we do that, it could go this way, it could go that way, everything else. And he would say, what is the situation we have to face? What do we have to look at? And you add that with your belief and realizing that every person in that place has a different faction of a basic principle, and something eventually shakes out.
Right.
Yeah, and you hit it on the head, right? We have to make sure that people are welcome and cared for in their situation. How does general conference affect the average person in the pew? Not a lot. Not a lot. Well, unless you're LGBTQ at this point, which to me is a, that's important. I want my queer brothers and sisters and siblings to be as welcome as I am in any community.
Now, and quickly, the regionalization fits very closely with being able to address your existing situation.
Yes, regionalization will help in many situations. Yeah.
It strikes me that the regionalization is probably, even though it's complicated in a lot of ways, it's probably the least controversial.
Is it the least controversial? I think in general, yes, it is. Yeah, the revised social principles. Yeah, there may be some issues with that. One thing that's a concern for me is the revised social principles are set as 5 different pieces of legislation. They span across 2 different committees. Some of it may pass and some of it may not. Well, then we end up with a really weird social principles setting that, yeah.
It's more weird than we have now.
They're pretty,
Sorry.
right now, the social principles are kind of they're part of the Book of Discipline, but it's a nice document. It's pretty organized and straightforward.
It's generally an organized document, but as I said, it's been edited by committee for 50 years. And so there are lines and phrases which are in one place and aren't in another, or, yeah. So adjusting that would be nice. So, yeah. Last one, if you can go to the next slide, remove harmful language. This is a goal, especially in the Western jurisdiction, to take out the harmful language about being incompatible with Christian teaching, to remove a funding ban. The queer delegation isn't allowed to get money from the United Methodist Church as a delegation. Remove language blocking gay and lesbian clergy. Did you know that we're not allowed to have gay and lesbian clergy in the United Methodist Church?
They were just not allowed to marry.
That's how Bishop Oliveto got the whole thing.
Yeah, okay, yes, you are not, you're not allowed to be self-avowed practicing homosexual. That's right, that's the phrase.
Court cases have gone through what is self-avowed. You have to stand up and say from the pulpit, I'm gay, or what if you hold hands with your partner, or what if you're seen?
I thought I had read something, just that they could not marry.
Yeah. Self-avowed practicing.
Self-avowed practicing is the weird statement, right? We want to open the option of marriage for all, of course, in the frame of where you live, right? In the United States, it's legal to marry as an LGBTQ couple. So let's let them get married in church, where they want to get married, right? And then removing specific chargeable offenses. There was a lot of money spent on trying to get Bishop Oliveto out of her position. So, yeah. And then there's a handful of other, I don't know, a complainant process that basically, I don't know, it's convoluted and complex and difficult. A person from Florida can complain about a bishop in Colorado.
Or a person in Colorado can complain about the Alabama senator.
Yes, or a person in Colorado can complain about the Alabama senator. Do we get a chance to vote the Alabama senator out of office? No.
Didn't Jeff Sessions get charged on something too in the legal process?
That I don't know. That I don't know. We'll have to look at that. So. Oh, okay. So, yes, we can get the pastor to talk to the Alabama senator. That's a good thing. Okay, well, I think there's a couple of more slides. So this next slide lists some of the additional concerns, and we talked a little bit about some of them. The U.S.-centric elements of the church. We want to, and the non-U.S. disaffiliations. We do want to look at that. We want to address our declining membership. Not only since 2019, but since probably the 1990s, mainline Protestant attendance and membership has been dropping. How can we reach the nuns and the no longers, right? Nuns and duns, that's it. How do we manage our financial difficulties? Because we have a declining membership, the administrative overhead of the church is pretty high. There's a risk that they'll reduce the number of bishops that we have in each jurisdiction. The Western jurisdiction, so from Colorado west, including Alaska and Hawaii, has 5 bishops. Bishop Oliveto and Bishop Carcano are retiring this year. That means 3 are left. It's possible that the General Conference won't let us elect more bishops. So we'll have 3 bishops for the whole region from Colorado west, including Alaska and Hawaii. Yeah, can you imagine a conference? So right now, the Mountain Sky Conference is Colorado, Wyoming, all of Montana, Utah, and 2 churches in Idaho. 2. There are 2 churches appointments listed on appointments right now. Oh, yeah. Anyway, but it's possible that it could go all the way down to the border of Mexico. So basically from, we will not take Texas. We will not take Texas. Yeah, they won't let us. So there's some other things that we need to look at. And one of the things that I needed to pay attention to, and I didn't look up, back in 2017, I don't remember, the Rocky Mountain Conference and the Big Sky Conference merged into one. We haven't had a general conference to authorize that merger yet. So when your delegates for the conference, for this annual conference, Mountain Sky Go, we talk about Legacy Yellowstone and Legacy Mountain Sky, Rocky Mountain. It's been, Legacy Yellowstone and Legacy Rocky Mountain. Because we haven't officially been blessed as one conference. And I'm sure the legislation is there, I just don't know where it is. So, okay, do I have other slides? Yeah, okay, so because this is General Conference 2020 being held in 2024, what happens to General Conference 2024? We're supposed to have General Conference every quadrennium, every 4 years. It's possible that we'll do this all over again in 2026. It may be that we need it, just like we needed the special called conference in 2019. But it may be that it just has to happen as a matter of process. Yeah. So pray for your delegates.
So how many are there total?
So
862 delegates.
Yes.
But
from the Mountain Sky, Legacy Rocky Mountain, Legacy Yellowstone, there are 6 total delegates, 6 voting delegates. And there are, I think we have 6 alternates of some sort or another attending General Conference. So I think we have a total of 12 of us. Maybe 11. I can't remember if that count was before or after Jeff couldn't come. That includes our dear former pastor, Jessica Rooks, who has been doing a wonderful job, as well as a handful of other great folks across this great big conference that we have. Meeting via Zoom has been a godsend because we have folks in Montana and Utah and the Western Slope. And one of our delegates now lives in Texas. I know, but she's still one of our delegates, so we're happy about that.
Probably it wouldn't be a bad thing to have the Texas United Methodists be part of the Western jurisdiction, because the remaining United Methodists in Texas
64%
are
of them are
moderate
black,
to
so.
progressive.
Yeah.
There are many towns
We'll
in
take that.
Texas that no longer have a United Methodist
Yeah.
congregation. And
Yeah.
there are many towns where those folks have done heroic things to create a new United Methodist presence.
It used to be that there was a United Methodist Church in every zip code of the United States. That's no longer the case, and we're sad about it. But we're hoping that this will help us revitalize the United Methodist Church and move forward into a better future. There's a lot of things that have changed in addition to COVID and the disaffiliations that we need to pay attention to. And I think we have a good opportunity to do that.
It's important to remember that we all grew up at the time of greatest religious participation.
The time of greatest religious participation in the United States, post-World War II, was the highest percentage of people attending church in America. The lowest, or one of the lowest, was the Great Depression, post another pandemic, the Spanish flu. So we'll see what happens, but we have, as a denomination and as a movement, the Methodist movement, responded again as the world changes to help people connect. It'll happen again.
Because I am a reserve delegate, I'm not officially on a committee. I am helping with, because we are a small delegation, the reserves have helped with reading all of the legislation that goes in, and I'll sit in that conference room and listen and use WhatsApp to tell my voting delegates what's going on. But I'm working with the Church and Society one. So there's 3 groups that are called Church and Society. They handle everything that's in the social principles, and it's a lot. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is that the old or the new? Yeah.
So I have a couple resources. This is a website, www.resourceumc.org is where everything is housed for a general conference. So all the legislation, the revised social principles, and links to the live stream. So that would be your main hub, resourceumc.org.
This one says it's for the general conference 2024 at 43.
Yeah.
I recommend a blog by a pastor named Jeremy Smith. He is in Seattle area, and his website is hackingchristianity.net. He just has a very well thought out, well-written perspective on things, and right now he has a 3-part summary that is a very helpful kind of overview of what we've covered tonight. And he may or may not be doing updates during general conference. I think he's headed to a new appointment in a couple months. So, and then I think, as much as I think just my word is to be a little bit cautious and critical of what we do hear from the national news, because their take cannot fully understand what the United Methodist process really is going to mean. So do your best to be an advocate for the Methodist Church with your friends around coffee and say, don't, hold on, this isn't all we are, as we've talked about as a church. Other resources or recommendations that you guys have?
One of the things the delegates for the Mountain Sky Conference talked about doing is a daily video blog that will be posted on the Mountain Sky UMC website, which is, it's abbreviated, mtnskyumc.org. Actually, if you Google Mountain Sky UMC, you should get to it. And we should have video blogs. I'm hoping that it'll be on the first page. I don't know, but we're gonna try to do that. It's a lot of long days. Sessions start at like 7 or 8 o'clock, or worship starts at 7 or 8 o'clock. There's a break for lunch. There's a break for dinner at 5. The Western jurisdiction, so everybody on the west side, has a meeting from 8 to 10 at night. And then we do it all over again the next morning. A total of 2 weeks. I will be there for a week. Stephanie will be there observing for a week. And they do take the Sunday in the middle as Sabbath, so there's nothing going on.
The
lobbying happens, yeah.
I've been through all kinds of psychological stresses and everything else, and I don't do that. But one thing that several of people I've talked with about have said, it's important that you're looking at things psychologically. that to me means spiritual. And that has carried me through situations I can't believe. And my concern about this is that I get stressed out with the organization, trying to understand what's going to happen and what it's going to be, and making an assumption that bigger is better. And it's a fallacy that bigger is easier to unite than smaller.
Right.
It's just a fallacy. It's ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. So one of the things that our delegation has started to look at is who's being hurt by this legislation? Who's being helped by this legislation? Where's the money coming from? Where's the money going? I also think our delegation is, we've had 4 years to get to know each other, which is a benefit, if you will. And one of the things we've learned is that we all have different gifts. Some of us are really gifted in understanding personal relationships and building those relationships and advocating for different groups and pieces and parts. Some of us, like me, are really good at making sure that we follow a couple of processes so that everybody gets the right information at the right time. So we're using all of our gifts to be as good a delegation as we can.
There is on the Mountain Sky website, if you search General Conference Prayer, there is a Sign Up Genius on there that covers our delegates in prayer 24 hours a day for the next 2 weeks. It is a huge benefit that we can't really underestimate. That just cloaking our people in prayers will be of huge assistance. So if that's something that you do and are interested in committing to, that would be a huge gift to our team.
Thank you for acknowledging that, Stephanie. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, there's a sign up on Mountain Sky Conference for providing prayers for us, because it's a lot of work. It's stressful. It's messy. So.
Thank you both so much. And I feel in these times of meeting, this roller coaster of emotion of like, well, this is it. Like, it's finally going to happen. We're going to be the church we want to be. And then we remember that although we are a faithful organization following God and Jesus and our faith, it can't help but be a flawed human political institution as well. And so there are people who just can't stomach that. And we've lost them. And that is so sad because it's messy and people get caught. And yet there's great benefit to the structure that we have that enable us to do this work. And so just hold kind of tight to that we can walk in the middle between those two things, and that we do have people who are paying attention to the people and the greater good. So I guess for now we're going to close. You can grab a cookie or something on your way out. And we'll do our best at St. Luke's to send out some of those resources and keep folks in the loop. But absolutely be praying for these two and our whole delegation, as well as our church. Any other last thoughts, feelings? Okay. Amen.